All right, we are live, coming straight out of Iowa. You can see I got the Iowa shirt on today for football. Let's just start this off with some pretty easy stuff. We are going to do a live stream, probably about 30 minutes today. Just want to talk about a couple of topics, Danny Masterson, and then really want to kind of highlight in, not really a true crime story, but a story that I've been following with Jimmy Fallon, one of my favorite late night hosts, or the Tonight Show hosts. I don't know what you'd call that. It's really not late night anymore, but kind of want to talk just about talk shows in general, because we heard this with the Ellen show. Now we're hearing it with the Jimmy Fallon show. So we're going to compare that just a little bit. I didn't think it was warranted to do a video, especially since there's a lot of information. Doing a lot of reading from some of the stories that came out might not be as fun to watch that in a video. But before we do that, if you are tuned in, make sure that you hit that subscribe button. We are growing pretty well. And then I just wanted to hit on something that I thought has been pretty fun this last 2 weeks or so. There's been a ton of comments on my channel, and that is a lot of fun. I'm going to tell you, I try to go through each one of the comments. I try to respond as much as possible. Especially working full time. And I don't say that for anybody to feel sorry for me, because I do work a lot of hours, especially if I'm out of town. Like next week, I'll be out of town a little bit more. I have some further stores that I go to. It is a lot of fun to wake up, see some of the comments, think about them throughout the day, come back and try to respond to them. If I work in the office, because I do have a couple of days where I'll work out of the office, or at least for a part day, then I can see the comments as they're coming up, almost answering them in real time. So I do appreciate that everybody is engaged. The other piece to it that I love is that there's so many different perspectives to some of these videos that I'm making. I usually try to come up with a theory or have my own thoughts on what the case is and where the case is going. And I've heard some really great theories from you folks that really get the creative juices going. I don't always agree with them by any means, but they're a theory. Right? So I guess it's the term agree or disagree might not work in this instance, because, obviously we have different theories is what we'll say, because we really don't know until the case is over and we see that they've been tried in a court and we see all the evidence. But I will tell you, there's been a lot of cool stuff. And then the last thing I'll hit before I jump into our topics today is just the fact that so many people are giving me some really great ideas. I know that I've had quite a few asks in the comments of videos to cover, and I'm going to try to get to a lot of them. Some of them I do pretty quickly. Some of them might take a little bit longer depending on the research, but I do appreciate that, because it makes it a lot easier for me to come up with the content. And then it kind of aligns with some of the cases that I'm watching. And then there's cases that I'm watching that I'll probably never cover, just because it's probably been done really well, or I can't wrap my mind around it. Like I watched the ESPN one yesterday. Can't remember what it's called. It was like Lauren Kolesko, and it's where she basically gets shot in the parking lot. And I watched that. It was a 90-minute documentary, and I was going to make a post about it because it was such a good documentary. There's nothing I could add value to that other than my own thoughts, which I thought about doing at some point, but it was a really good documentary. If you get a chance to see it, watch that. And then for my Canadian folks, The Fifth Estate, I hate how it's like 3 months in between episodes of it, but I watched the Glacier one this morning, and I don't remember what the gentleman's name was, but it was the hockey player that went missing in 1989 in Austria. And that one was a good one. That one, it wasn't, I'm not sure it was crime related as much as a missing person. But we like to do missing persons on here as well. And that one kind of got the creative juices going as well. So Fifth Estate, check that out for my Canadian friends. But that being said, let's jump into what our topics are today. Getting text messages, so let's turn that off. I will say that the Danny Masterson stuff that came out this past week was pretty interesting to me. Now, he was convicted back in 2017 and ended up getting retried. And he ends up getting convicted again, and he's going to spend 30 years behind bars. Good morning, Mudcakes. How are you doing? I love the comments, by the way, that you're leaving on the channel. So I notice them all. But Danny Masterson, I would say got kind of lucky. And if you hear some of the story, he could have essentially done 2 terms, 30 years back to back, right? Or consecutive rather than concurrent, which would have meant that he would have been in jail for 6 years. He's only going to spend 30 years in jail. And I say only, obviously 30 years is a long time, but he's been found guilty now a couple of times, right? So for me, I don't feel sorry for him. I was a huge fan of that 70s show. Loved his character on the show itself for sure. But as I've been watching this case, I'm kind of seeing this happen a little bit more, where you see these young actors or singers back in the early 2000s that are now being accused of some form of sexual assault. And I asked the question, does it become an ego thing? Is it a thing where they make a lot of money, they get their way, they become popular at a younger age? Keep in mind, Danny Masterson was in his 20s at the time of that 70s show, I'm pretty sure, because I think he's 47 now, and I don't remember when the show started, if it was late 90s or into the early 2000s. But, is it an ego thing that happens, and then they just think they can do whatever they want? In Danny Masterson's case, does the Church of Scientology have something to play in that? If you listen to like Leah, I don't know how to say her name properly, Remini, huge. I can't say advocate because she's not an advocate for the church. She was a part of the church at some point. She left the church, and she's been a huge critique of the church afterwards. She does a documentary on it, very good documentary actually, quite a few episodes in that. And she stands in solidarity with the victims in this case as they are given their victim impact statements and as the sentence is getting handed out. Max, here's the Dobie. He's not happy about something, so I'm gonna let him out real quick. You want out? There you go, Dobie. Gotta let the Dobie go do his thing. So, and we've got the wine behind us as well. He's gonna want out too, so that's okay. If he starts barking, we'll let him out. But I did pull up some stuff. And then the last thing we're going to hit real quick is, like I said, we're going to talk about Jimmy Fallon. And the reason why I want to talk about this one, there's no crimes that have been committed, but Jimmy Fallon is definitely one of my favorite hosts. And he was one of my favorite characters on Saturday Night Live. So this was pretty heartbreaking to read through some of the stories about the toxicity in the workplace. And the reason why I bring this up is I work in a pretty professional environment. I manage multiple stores, and I have a really high expectation for the people that work for me, both indirectly and directly. My job currently doesn't have any direct reports, so everything is indirectly. And I always believe in treating people with respect, but having a high bar, right? I always believe that there's opportunities in what we do on a day-to-day basis. And sometimes that can be translated into it's never good enough. And I don't believe that. I do believe that it can be good enough, but I do believe that you should always be looking for opportunities. And one of the people that I worked for, I would say 15 years ago or so, had said, always celebrate your wins, but don't ignore your opportunities, right? Don't let one overshadow the other. And when I was reading through some of the stuff that was happening with Jimmy Fallon, I was thinking through that of some of my old teams, and I've had some really great teams, and I've had the opportunity to work with some really great people in my career. And I was thinking through that, when we set that bar really high, it's easy to become frustrated. And that is no excuse, right? So I had to reflect on some of my leadership and start thinking through, did my frustrations come through? And I'm sure they did, especially in my younger years. And I started thinking maybe that's a talk show host thing, because it's very similar to what we hear with Ellen DeGeneres as well. So we're going to do some comparisons of that and kind of talk through that. So let's pull up some stuff. I'm going to transition. Let's do this real quick. You're going to see that. I've got it kind of kicked up here, but basically Danny Masterson's sexual assault allegations in trial, everything you need to know. I won't read through all of this stuff, but I do kind of want to talk through I said earlier that he was already convicted in 2017. they were claimed in 2017, and then he was charged in 2020. So I was wrong on that. So anybody that's listening, I'm sorry. I read that wrong. But basically, a lot of the stuff with this case right here comes to fame, comes to fortune. I am of true belief, because I hear a lot where, maybe somebody comes forward and they're really just trying to put dirt in his name, or they have ill intent. It's really hard to dismiss when you have multiple accusers in a case like this, and especially with the level of detail that they provide when they go through court. I know you're going to have people on both sides. I'm a huge believer of the court system, and I know the court system doesn't always get it right. And I'm also a huge believer that you need to question things as they come up. I don't just accept things, okay? Same with, you've heard me say it in the videos, I don't always believe what media says. There's a lot of stuff in the media that, you got to decipher what's true, what's not true, what's hearsay. I even see it on forums where I'll read through stuff and, some of the facts don't add up, or, even in my videos, I got to go back and fact check. And that's why I love you folks, because you'll leave a comment and sometimes I get it wrong. I'm human, and that's good. And that's why I love having an engaged community. So for this one here, when it first came out, immediately I was thinking, when the first accuser came out, was this true? I don't know Danny Masterson as a person. I only know him as an actor, so I can only go based off of that. And that's a really kind of a bad approach, because I only see what has been in the media or, in his art as entertainment, what kind of person he is. So, that is a flaw within itself. That has its own biases. And as I was listening to the story, I was like, wow. And then once you get to 4 accusers, I was like, that's pretty crazy stuff, right? The one thing that comes up a lot in this one, and I didn't queue up the video, and I won't watch the video, but just some psychologists that were saying, hey, his first 2 victims stayed in touch with Danny Masterson. And you hear this in like domestic violence cases and cases of sexual assault, that the victim will stay in contact with their abuser for some time. Now, I'm not a psychologist, so I'm going to butcher basically what the video that I watched, but basically they're saying, psychologically, they become attached to that person. And they tried to utilize this in court to say that, Danny Masterson was still in a relationship and that kind of stuff. So, you kind of read right here, Masterson, I've never been charged with a crime, let alone convicted of one. In this country, you are presumed innocent until proven guilty. However, in the current climate, it seems as if you are presumed guilty the moment you are accused. And I get that, and I get how he could utilize that, especially in the Me Too movement phase. You see this in the Nick Carter case as well. When Me Too came out, there was a lot of accusers that came out at that time. And some of them may not have been credible and some of them would have been credible. Either way, that's not for me to judge. But with Danny Masterson, he's trying to play off of that fact, right? He's trying to say that, he's been canceled for whatever reason. And for him going through, he's been proven guilty at this point. So the only thing we can assume is that he is guilty of what he has done, and that the Church of Scientology kind of tried to cover this up. Now, I don't know a lot about the church, and I'm not going to try to give you a rundown in what's going on with Scientology. I do encourage you to watch Leah's documentary. Now, that is one-sided because she's angry with the church, but I do think that brings in some of the answers to the mystery to the church and some of the things that we've seen with how heavily guarded they are. And I do keep in mind that, there's a lot of celebrities that participate, so that could be a big reason why they need so much security. But in this case, you hear a lot from the victims in like stalking claims, hacking claims, getting into emails, sending messages, phone calls, things like that. Did the Church of Scientology have something to do with this? We couldn't say for sure. We also got to look at the fact that there could be some fans that are angry that may have may have taken this on themselves and reached out to some of the victims to try to scare them or to try to discount some of their claims. So that all comes out in that as well, right? So some things to think about here. I thought this was pretty interesting. So, make no mistake, the Church of Scientology is under attack. It's a new era. Victims are realizing they do have recourse and they don't have to be afraid anymore. Okay, so that was pretty interesting. The big thing that I will hit here, because I'm not going to go into too many details, I'm going to read this one out, is that, again, Danny Masterson has been found guilty. He is going to spend 30 years in jail. Now, obviously, he could appeal again, and stuff could happen. It'll be pretty interesting to see how this goes on. The reason why I brought it up, though, is because I saw this with Nick Carter as well. Like I stated, I did do a video on Nick Carter that I'm going to release next week. But I didn't want to do the same video twice, and I felt like Danny Masterson and Nick Carter were very similar cases. Now, do keep in mind they're different people, different victims, different set of circumstances, and I understand that. They're not the same case. Just because one's guilty doesn't mean the other one's guilty, and I'm not in that mindset. However, I didn't want to put videos back to back that had similar cases because it might appear that we were in that mindset. But I do believe that based off of the facts that we've heard in this case, that Masterson is guilty. I am going to read this out, though, because I thought this was kind of interesting, some stuff. The Dracula 2000 Actors Rep issued a statement denying all claims of sexual assault that same month. We are aware of the victim's 16-year-old allegations. It was only after the victim was in contact with Leah Remini that she made allegations of sexual assault by Mr. Masterson. This came out in court quite a bit because of the Church of Scientology, and basically what they're trying to say is that because Leah has an axe to grind against the church, that these victims came forward, and I'll leave that up to you folks if you believe that or don't believe that. At this point, I'm not a juror. He's been found guilty, so he's going to have to, if he's not guilty, he's going to have to prove his way out of that. But based off of what we've seen so far, it's been pretty interesting. So I'm going to stop there. I want to know what you think. I want to hear, was there any parts of the case that came out that kind of stuck out for you? Do you think that it is just an axe to grind and that, Leah was able to talk to some females and have them all come forward? I don't believe that just because, they obviously had a relationship with Danny Masterson at some point. They obviously have communication at some point. How did Leah figure that out? How did she know that, or did she know that before? And how was she able to, have 4 people come up with these stories? It's very interesting to me. What I thought was more important, though, out of all of this, because I used to do some stuff with Verizon and Hopeline when I worked at Verizon. And so I'd have to go present telling Amy's story, which was, an employee back in the 2000s that was a victim to domestic violence. And when we would tell that story, we'd hear a lot of stats, specifically in Oklahoma when I lived there, about victims of domestic violence and, how hard it is for victims to come forward. And I think about that in this case, that there was 4 people brave enough to come forward. Not only that, they have to deal with the media. Okay, they have to deal with fans, overzealous fans of Danny Masterson. They have to deal with the defense attorneys and how aggressively they're going to be attacked. They have to deal with all of this stuff, and they still find the strength to come forward and tell their story, right? And that's the thing that really kind of stuck out in this more so than anything, was that these folks came forward and they were able to tell their story in graphic detail, and I commend them for that. Okay. What I didn't like, and I'm a huge fan of Ashton Kutcher, especially since if you go back and you kind of you look at Ashton Kutcher and some of the stuff he was doing in Congress. I can't remember if it was Congress or in front of the Senate when he was talking about kids and child trafficking, and I commend him for that. This one I thought was kind of interesting. I know they came out as character witnesses. However, I think like Ashton Kutcher and Mila Kunis, they're role models, and I think that it would have probably been better if they would have just kind of stayed silent in this one, because they do come out and try to give him a character witness and talk about how he's a role model, and maybe they don't believe it, but again, there's just a lot of things that point towards Danny Masterson, and he did have a lot of support behind him, so it was a pretty fair trial in his case, right? He's able to afford lawyers that most of us can't afford, and that one was kind of a no bueno for me on this one. Again, I can't dirt anybody for doing that, but this one for me, I just think we see it quite a bit where you've got these rich and powerful folks that think they can get away with anything just because they have money. They think they can take advantage of people just because they have money, and they think because they're so popular that nobody is going to go after them and nobody's going to tell their story. And again, he's been found guilty, so I can say that. And even so, if I said it, it would be opinion. Now it's a factual thing, right? Unless he overturns his guilty conviction, for me, this one was pretty disgusting, in my opinion. And I think that it's going to be interesting to watch, again, the Nick Carter one from the Backstreet Boys, because it's a very similar scenario. But again, different case, different victims, different person that's going on trial. A lot of similar stuff. Okay. Let's go through. Let's talk about Ellen DeGeneres. So a little bit lighter, because this is not a crime that's happening here. Just a toxic work environment. And like I was stating before, sometimes work environments get toxic, and sometimes it could be for different reasons. What it sounds like in these cases, specifically with Ellen and specifically with Jimmy Fallon, is it becomes an ego thing, right? You have a star. You have somebody that's followed and beloved by millions, right? You have folks that are movie stars. They could be stars of TV like Jimmy Fallon was, or like Ellen was with her show, her sitcom, and they become very, very, very popular. Now on their show, they also do a lot of cool things, right? You see a lot of really good segments, a lot of feel-good stuff for people as well. But what's happening behind the scenes to make this stuff happen is there's a bar being set, right? And there's a lot of stress on these teams because they have to get the ratings. It's no different than me doing YouTube and wanting to land some subscribers and land more views and things like that, right? You start getting obsessed with that type of stuff. Now, in my case, I'm the only person that works on this stuff, right? I have to put together for videos, I put together scripts, I put together pictures, I'll go through and do all my research, and then I do the editing, and then in some cases I'll have to re-record. I do get some help with like the walls in the back and trying to change some things, and some help with the graphics, at least for people to watch some of my videos before they go live and to look at some of the graphics to see if the thumbnails are okay. But I do a lot of that on my own, so I've got to hold myself accountable. Well, in these cases, they have big workforces that are trying to deliver the best content possible. And TV is a stressful environment. I spent a couple of years getting my multimedia associate's degree, where I did do some basic television stuff. And then I did a lot of digital stuff on the back end, spent some time in radio. Keep in mind, it was all for practicum purposes or work experience, so I wasn't getting paid to do it. But I did get to do some pretty cool stuff. Like I got to be on the set of Andromeda in Vancouver, British Columbia. Got to see the set of Dark Angel back in the day when I was really young. That was super cool. And I don't want to age myself, but I did get to see some of the 3D modeling and animation for Josie and the Pussycats when they do like the whole Walkman thing or the Sony Discman. And that was really cool to see back when I was in high school. So that does kind of date me a little bit, but I got to see a lot of that cool stuff. But I did also get to see some of the stress because you got to hit your deadlines and you're really trying to get the views, right? You're trying to get a mass amount of people to watch your content, to get engaged with your content, and to stay engaged, right? That's your goal. And you have to be able to go through and decide, what is the content that I'm delivering? that resonates best with the user, right, which is the person that's watching, and how do I keep them coming back? And for TV, in order to get a next episode, you have to hit a certain amount of numbers. So it might be a minimum of 2.5 million people that are concurrently viewing your episode. Could be 5 million, could be 7 million. Whatever network you're on is going to decide that, because there's always pilot shows that are going on in the background. And if a pilot goes really well, it might knock your show into either a different day part, right? So it might knock it out of prime time. It might knock it to a later time at night, might knock it to an earlier time in the day, whatever that case is, right? A good example is Jimmy Fallon going from the late night show to the Tonight Show. That is a huge difference, because you're going to get a lot more people that are going to tune into the Tonight Show just based off of the time, and it's primetime television. So I cue that up because there's a lot of pressure. Now, if you're Ellen or Jimmy, you got to think you're the talent of the show. So if things aren't going well, that pressure seems to be on you. And I think part of what we're seeing with some of the toxic work environment is, one, ego, right? Because when you have that many people following you, I don't know what it feels like to have 1 million people check and watch one of my videos, but I'm sure that it would give me a pretty big ego, right? I am sure that the first time that happens, I am going to be sitting on cloud 9. Now, I hope that when that happens, because I've got a lot of confidence that if I keep doing it, I will get there one day, that when that happens, that I can keep myself grounded and keep myself grounded in the community. And that's why we're trying to build the community right, try to get the community engaged, and try to listen to every member in our community, right? And not discount what their theories or what their feedback is, even if we don't agree with it, because we want to have different perspectives and we want to be able to keep ourselves grounded. Now, what I think happens over time when you hit 10 million, 12 million, 15 million on a daily basis, your ego inflates. And now you have people that are running the camera, or you have people that are doing script, or in some of the cases in Jimmy Fallon's case, where somebody might have got the cue card wrong and they get blasted on, live television. Now, obviously they cut that part out, but we're going to talk a little bit about what happened and be a little bit more specific about that. But now people become expendable. And these might be some very good people, right? On the set of Ellen, and this is a good quote here, on the set of Ellen, there was a lot of stuff that come out that says, there was racially stuff or racism that was happening, and people letting that stuff fly like it was okay. People were treated very poorly. People were treated like they weren't people at all. Depending on how Ellen was feeling that day, she would just treat people basically like they were expendable, like I said. Nobody was on her level. Her ego was inflated. And something like that happens over time. And again, I've never been in her situation, and I'm not making any excuses for her by any means. So I just don't know what it feels like to be that popular, that famous, and that rich. But I'm sure there's an ego that comes with it. Now, we don't hear that from everybody that is that popular or that has that type of ego by any means. But if you look, it's pretty crazy. And I'm going to read this so that way it sounds a lot better than just coming from my own words. Let's just start at the top here. That be kind bullshit only happens when the cameras are on. It's all for show, one former employee told BuzzFeed. I know they give money to people and help them out, but it's for the show. And that's kind of sad, because you do see that stuff happen a lot, right? And I think that really started with Oprah back in the day. You get a car and you get a car and everybody in the studio audience gets a car. Now, the difference being, obviously, Oprah being super popular, you never hear reports of anybody that worked for Oprah that had any issues, right? At least not at the scale of like Ellen and Jimmy Fallon. So I want to put that out there. It's not a comparison or anything that I've heard from the Oprah show. But what I would say is that Oprah really kind of paved the way. And you had a lot of people back then, if you did some research, like you had Geraldo, who had, a good show. I think Ricky Lake had a show. But Oprah would set the standard for everybody, I think, going forward. I think we could probably all agree to that. And she did it for years, and you don't hear any of her ex-staff members talking about this stuff. So there are people out there that can be very famous and still treat people very well. It happens, okay? BuzzFeed News spoke to 1 current and 10 former employees. So I'm going to skip a little bit. Actually, no, I won't. All of whom asked to remain anonymous, fearing retribution from the award-winning NBC daytime talk show and others in the entertainment industry. They said they were fired after taking medical leave or bereavement days to attend family funerals. One employee who claims she was fed up with the comments about her race essentially walked off the job. Others said they were also instructed by their direct managers to not speak to DeGeneres if they saw her around the office. Now imagine that, okay? Yeah, ego, right? Ego. And don't get me wrong, I've in my life I've had an ego, right? I've lacked humility in some areas. I'm sure there's been times where I haven't treated people the way that I should have, especially in my younger years, right? I've never taken the stance that I'm better than anybody by any means. I really love having two-way conversations. That's always interested me, and I've always been a people person. But I'm sure that my egos come out as, you know, in this case, though, this just blows my mind. Like, imagine that and I'm just thinking of my everyday life. Imagine I went into a store and somebody didn't want to talk to me because they thought I was having a bad day, or because my title is bigger than theirs, or because more people know me than they know them, so they shouldn't talk to me. Imagine walking through life like that. We walk through life because we want to interact with other humans. Now, there's nothing in life that says that you're better than other people because you have this huge following. You have a good entertainment value, and that's awesome, right? And I know there's good people out there, but I know that there's people that aren't. And I won't say who my cousin is, but my cousin did some movies when he was really young. He was in the movie Air Bud. He was in Free Willy. He was in quite a few Disney movies back in the day. And I learned from him early on, he was always humble and had a lot of humility. And I remember when we were kids, like, people in random towns would walk up to him and they'd want his autograph and, you know, that kind of stuff. And to me, I was young. I was like, wow, that is cool. Like, that is a cool thing. But he was always a human. He was never like larger than life. And I think that taught me something early on in life. Like, he was never better than anybody. And believe me, he had a lot of money. As a kid, a lot of money. And so when I read something like this, it makes me really sad that there's people that worked on this set. There's people that did everything they could to bring the entertainment value to me as the user or the viewer. Sorry, the dogs are barking in the background. And they work so hard on this show, and I get it that Ellen is the face of the show, but all of these workers put this show together and make this happen and make the magic happen. And really, they're in the background. We don't ever get to see those people. We never get to see the hard work that they put in, but they deliver such a good product that it seems flawless and it seems seamless. And these are the folks that should be thanked. Instead, they're working in this environment, okay? This one's good. So most of the former employees blamed executive producers and the senior managers for the day-to-day toxicity, but one former employee said that, ultimately, it's Ellen's name on the show. She really needs to take more responsibility for the workplace environment. So before I jump over to Jimmy Fallon, I just want to say this. And there's a lot of stuff in here, right? And we could hit a lot more stuff. But I want to get to Jimmy Fallon because this Ellen thing's been going on for so long. And I want to ask you, do you think that when a big celebrity like this gets called out for this type of work environment and this toxicity and treating people badly, when they apologize, do you buy the apology? Do you think that their apology is heartfelt? Do you think they've actually learned a lesson? And maybe the question's rhetorical. I don't know. I just don't think it is. Now, in some cases, I think once people kind of reflect on it and they go back, if they show that they've made positive changes, if they show that they've went to right those wrongs, and how they would do that, for me, would be to see a segment where maybe Ellen sits down with some of the employees that had some of these gripes. Right, Mudcakes? Yeah, it's no, right? It is no. That's what I think. Now, if I saw where she sat with every one of the ex-employees that were on that show and listened to them and then did something for those employees, because keep in mind, some of these employees now have mental issues, right? Like, if you read through some of this stuff, and again, I can't go through all of it, but some of them never had a breakdown in their life, and now all of a sudden they have a breakdown. Some of them had never had panic attacks, and now they have chronic panic attacks. Some of them, like, it's messed with their mental so much that they can't work, or they've left the industry altogether. And you're going to see that in some of the Jimmy Fallon stuff. We hear time and time again, like, this was a dream job for them, and essentially they had to walk on eggshells. Pretty crazy stuff. So just some stuff that I'm going to read this last quote and we're going to move to Jimmy Fallon, but just some things to think about when we're watching these big stars. This one's sad, but I feel like I'm not alone in this, she said. We all feel this. We've been feeling this way, but I've been too afraid to say anything because everyone knows what happens when you say something as a black person. You're blacklisted. Okay? That came up a lot with the Ellen stuff. I don't care what it is. You should be able to say something when you're in a work environment that's toxic. And I'm sure we've all been there, right? It's much better when you're in a work environment that's not toxic. So let's talk about my favorite one. My favorite talk show host, sorry. And it's The Tonight Show. And I've been watching Jimmy Fallon for a long time. And this was sad when I read this. I was like, I cannot believe it. I'll quit watching his show based off of this alone. So basically a lot of the stuff that you'll hear in this one, and I'll do kind of a recap of it. Unfortunately, Jimmy Fallon didn't treat people very well. Now, I don't know if Jimmy Fallon's stuff was as much ego as it was substance abuse based off of the stuff that I'm reading. Either way, there's no good excuse to treat people badly, right? But at the end of the day, this is one that I think when he's reflecting on it, do I think that he's apologizing because he's sorry, or is he apologizing because he doesn't want to lose the ratings? I still feel like there's ratings being lost here. What my hope is for any of these folks is that they do get to reflect, because we all make mistakes, right? We've all probably have treated somebody badly at some point, whether it's intentional or not. You know, it requires us to do some reflection on that, and then to basically either come to terms, why did we do it or not do it, and then either apologize or at some point move on and just do better, right? In this case, basically, I'll give you kind of a synopsis and we'll read through some of this stuff. People were walking on eggshells because Jimmy, and it's alleged, so if you read the articles, would come in hungover from drinking the night before, and they wouldn't know what kind of mood Jimmy Fallon was in. And basically what they were saying was, you know, depending on his mood, he would take it out on people that were working there, and the smallest things, or what they say, the slightest quote unquote things, would come forward and he would just snap, essentially. Now, nobody was physically assaulted, but he would berate the employees. And one such incident that happened, you know, there's some clarification from Seinfeld, but basically when Seinfeld was on the show, you know, the person that was holding up the cue cards made a mistake. Jimmy kind of scolds him. Seinfeld says, you know, you should really apologize to that guy for that. And they kind of laugh it off. Seinfeld does come out and say later on, you know, it was an awkward moment, but he didn't feel like, you know, it was malintent by any means. And at the end of the day, though, it doesn't matter what Seinfeld felt or thought. It really matters what the cue card person thought. But it was kind of weird. They do also talk about a situation in 2017 where they come in, they think that Jimmy was intoxicated by something and he wasn't getting the show down right. And that kind of comes out a little bit. You do hear some stories about Jimmy getting onto the elevator during the day and smelling like alcohol. Again, these are all alleged. And these would all essentially be excuses as to why he was treating people badly. But he does come out and apologize, right? And he does have people that stick up for him and say that that he did treat them well, right? And you kind of see that right here. Like a current employee of the show who spoke to people described Fallon as super communicative and a really, really positive guy. And yeah, to your point, Mudcakes, like there is no permission to treat people badly. And I'm going to read through this part in just a second, but you do have people that are protecting them for sure. I'd be curious to see if it's just, I didn't mean to do that. If it's just people that currently work for him, or if there is anybody else that left the show that would be positive. And then he did come out and apologize, so I'll be curious to see what happens. But he makes a point of commending you when you do a great job and when he's happy, said the employee, who preferred to remain anonymous. And any feedback I've received is always like, hey, we don't need to do that again. I've been very constructive and helpful for me in continuing to put together a show that he's happy with. I've been belittled, yelled at, nothing like that, or I've never been, sorry. It's all exactly how a boss should give feedback to an employee. And I agree with that. So maybe he's learned something, and maybe some of these employees have been, scorned after leaving. But here's the Seinfeld stuff. So it was a very awkward, and Jerry Seinfeld was like, you should apologize to him, almost trying to make a joke out of it. But Seinfeld does come back out and say, see right here, I remember this moment quite well. I teased Jimmy about a flub, and we all had a fun laugh about how rarely Jimmy is thrown off, the comedian said. It was not uncomfortable at all. Jimmy and I still occasionally recall it and laugh. Idiotic twisting of events. Here's the 2017 stuff. I won't go over that again. But you do hear some of the stories where they set up like a green room that ends up being an emotional room where people can go in and cry and let out their emotions. Now, if this allegation is true, why would you set that up, right? That's kind of weird to me, where if you're in a work environment where you require to have a designated space for people to let out their emotions, that's pretty rough. You also hear in this specific article of people not wanting to talk to each other. So no coffee talk, or no what you would call, like, what do they call that? Water room talk, kind of like what you see on The Office, because they were scared if Jimmy came out and saw that he would think that they weren't working and they would get scolded. And what that in itself leaves a toxic work environment, because then there's no collaboration. There's no room for teamwork. There's no room to get to know your peers and to get to know your teammates. And really, there's no room to foster learning other jobs and learning what other people do. So what happens when they're sick? Right? Like, I can flex over and I can help out, and it really creates that team environment. And I don't want to say I assume that a lot of this stuff is true, but if Jimmy comes out and apologizes for it and doesn't discount some of this stuff, I would say that it probably is stuff that's happening. And I'm sure that whoever came up with this, I don't think that Jimmy was the one that came up with, let's have a room for people to have emotions. It would have to be one of the producers or have to be one of the leaders in the building. And I'm sure they did it with positive intent that just turned very negatively, right? Yeah, I agree, right? Honest apology and evidence that deserves forgiveness. Yes, and I agree. And everybody does deserve second chances, and everybody does deserve forgiveness as long as they're authentic in that. So I'm with you on that. I will leave this. Again, I think Jimmy has definitely been one of my favorite people to watch on TV, but I don't know him behind the scenes. I don't know what he's like in person. Again, I'm sure it's not easy having that level of fame and people walking up to you. But again, that doesn't give you a pass to be mean to people, especially that are working hard for you. And I've always been a believer, if you've got people working hard for you or people are supporting you, even if they have, they don't agree with everything that you do, I don't think you should agree with any single person all the time, right? We're all individuals and we all have our own thoughts. And it would be scary if you agreed with one person all the time in all of their beliefs, and right? You've got to have multiple perspectives. And in this case, it really feels like it's Jimmy's way or the highway. And that can get really dangerous really fast because, like I was stating before, there's nobody to keep you grounded in that. Now, it's easy for me to say that on the outside looking in. Let's just be 100% honest. Again, it's not an excuse to Jimmy or Ellen or anybody else that treats people this way. I don't know what it feels like to have millions of people that want to see my content and entertainment on a day-to-day basis. Very few people ever get to experience that, right? You do have to be very talented in order for that to happen. Very much like the theme today, Danny Masterson probably felt that way and had a little bit of an ego. Ellen probably feels that way, has a little bit of an ego. And Jimmy feels that way and has a little bit of an ego. So all really talented people, but have all treated people really poorly in the past, and this is coming out. Now, obviously, Danny Masterson, a totally different situation than treating people bad at work. That is obviously criminal, whereas in Ellen's case and Jimmy's case, we don't see anything that's criminal yet that could come out. You could possibly see some stuff with workplace environment stuff that could have settlements in the future, but it is pretty disheartening when you see somebody that's on TV that you look up to, that you're like, wow, love your content, but you're not treating people. But, because that would be a dream job for me. I've got a lot of experience with cameras and stuff like that, with editing, which you could argue because sometimes my editing is not always the best. But I would really like to see Ellen and Jimmy come out and do some stuff for the people that have worked for them or that have had these issues in the past. And look, it would be great to hear like workplace improvements as well, where they take care of people that might be feeling that way. Or I think in any workplace environment, ask the questions and don't let your ego get in front. If 9 out of your 10 people have a really good experience and one person's not, figure out why that one person is not having a good experience. Doesn't mean you need to cater to the 1 and not cater to the 9, but just listen to what they're saying. All right, on that note, Cooper's trying to go out, so he's telling me that I need to end it. It's been a little bit longer than what I expected. I appreciate everybody tuning in. I do appreciate Mudcakes. Love that you're engaged and leaving some comments in the chat. That is much appreciated. Probably not as fun as topics as we've done in the past, but I want to continue to do the live streams because as we build up the channel, it is an opportunity for me to do it live. I will say it is a lot harder to do it live because I got to come up with the information the night before. And as I'm doing this and I make mistakes, I can't edit it out like I can in a video. So it's much easier making videos sometimes. But it is a lot of fun to be able to do it live and talk through some stuff, and then it kind of goes off course probably within the first minute and a half. So I do appreciate everybody watching this video. On that note, I hope everybody has a great weekend. I hope you got a little bit of value of what we're talking about, and leave a comment down below. If there's some cool stuff that you would like me to cover in a live stream, I definitely will do it. If you think I got it wrong, I'm okay with that. Say I got it wrong. Say that I didn't look at the evidence right, or I didn't look at this the way that I should have, or maybe I'm just off base. Doesn't mean I'll agree with you, but I will definitely respond back as long as it's done in a way that is, very adult-like. Like if it's a personal attack, I won't respond to that. I'll just get rid of the comment. But if it's something that's, the content is not there, I do want to hear from you because I do think that I want to have a very collaborative community, and I do love listening to different perspectives, and I'm always open to changing my perspectives as well. Look, we all love true crime. We love to hear different theories, and I think that's what makes true crime so unique, is because until a case is solved, and even when it is solved, sometimes there's conspiracies that happen behind it, but there can be multiple theories as to why something happens, and that's what keeps me engaged as well. So you as a community have done a very good job, even as small as we are, engaging in this community, and I really appreciate that. So keep that going, and no problem, Mudcakes. I appreciate that you're thanking me as well. Have a great weekend. My next video will be sometime next week. I will talk to you all.